So what are some good assessments, alternative assessments to traditional paper and pencil tests that do not water down the curriculum or lower academic standards? I'm going to just survey some of the alternatives that are commonly used in Landmark College classrooms, and I certainly invite you to share those that you're familiar with. And when we think about alternative assessments, I like to think of them within a universal design framework, which anticipates diversity of learners in all classrooms. And really, the alternative assessments are part of this domain, the strategic domain, which involves the frontal regions of the brain, the kind of planning, prioritizing, organizing, executive functions of the brain, in employing strategies to express or put forth what it is we've learned. And traditionally, students have been tested by either writing or talking, sometimes less commonly, but there are other modes in which we can assess student learning. And the article on UDL and assessment by David Rose that I reference in this micro unit gives us a really good overview of why we want to be thinking both about the barriers that traditional paper and pencil tests sometimes impose, especially when they're not thoughtfully designed or they don't provide the kinds of accommodations that would level the playing field. So we're looking again at the strategic network, the frontal regions of the brain, and if we look at CASTS, the Center for Applied and Special Technology, they talk, and we're looking specifically about the providing options for expression and communication, as well as optimizing access to tools and technological supports. And we've already looked at ways in that, say, a well-designed digital test can be modified according to the preferences of all users in regarding things like font size and color, spacing on the page, access to online dictionaries, access to text-to-speech or voice recognition if appropriate. So we're looking at expressing knowledge. And when we consider, alternative designs, let me spread this out a bit. Okay, alternative designs. I refer to Grant Wiggins' classic backward design approach, because if we're going to design good, that is valid, useful alternative assessments that promote learning, we need to start with our essential goals or outcomes for what we want students to take away. And this is a nice little chart that fills in a little bit of that. So it's what do we want students to know and understand and be able to do ultimately? And really taking the long term, is it really essential that they memorize a list of terms and definitions, or is it more important that they learn modes of thinking and expression that are characteristic, say, of being a historian or being a biologist? What's more important, memorizing dates or understanding underlying thematic concepts about the way history affects individuals? We also want to be thinking about what 21st century themes or skills can be leveraged, and we refer there to things like creative problem solving and collaboration and effective communication, sometimes called the soft skills that employers value so highly. And I tell teachers that we're kind of thinking long term here. Really, what is it going to be important that students carry away from this course or experience with you 5 years from now? What do you want that long-term learning? That will help you determine what the key essential learning is from your course. So we start with our goal. Traditionally, teachers start planning with content. Oh, I'm teaching American history. Well, I'm going to start at the Civil War and go until, the World War II. And so I've got to cover all these years and I've got to cover all these events. Well, Grant Wiggins and Backward Design say, no, step back from the content. What are those long-term goals that you want students to carry with them that relate to understanding American history? And then think, before you go to the content, think about how will I know that students have achieved those goals? So we determine the assessment evidence. What is going to be evidence that students understand and can practice, transfer, and apply their knowledge? And how can we, importantly, how can we evaluate their performance in ways that are fair and consistent and don't disadvantage certain learners? And only then will we go back and fill in with the content. And we want to be really clear and upfront students, not only on the syllabus, but in daily and weekly assignments to communicate how what we're doing in class today relates to our long-term goals. And the other really important thing to remember about this in terms of assessment is that we do not want to alter or compromise essential goals by offering alternative assessments that don't demonstrate that students meet those standards. So we really have to decide what is essential learning. So for instance, if I'm teaching an English composition course, it's very likely that some of the long-term learning goals has to do with students being able to produce pieces of writing that meet a certain criteria. So designing an oral presentation or a visual chart or a diorama may not be a relevant and valid way of assessing student learning for that essential goal of learning to write like a historian or learning to write like an English major. If I'm teaching a history class, I can ask myself whether a paper and pencil essay test is indeed the best way to assess student learning. So, going back and, if I'm teaching a writing course, chances are that alternatives to writing are not going to play as large a role as in a history or a science course where the goal is not to produce and improve student writing. And so that helps us determine what kinds of choice and variety it makes sense to offer. This is a sample course assessment that was created by a landmark faculty member for, I think, a child development course. And the instructor here offered 8 different kinds of ways of fulfilling that final project. Remember, this was not a writing course, but one of the alternatives is you can produce a document in essay format or a brochure using Publisher or a portfolio, a poster board, and so on. There are a number of, you can produce a video, you can do a podcast. And the alternatives, I would never recommend giving students these many choices on most assignments, maybe at the end of the year, but on typical assignments, giving students some options, maybe a choice of 2 or possibly 3 options, and asking that they choose other options for the next assignment is a good approach for maximizing the benefit of offering options in terms of improving student motivation and interest, balanced against the basic fact that too many options really increase our cognitive load as we think about deciding among them. So that's a fine line to balance. So I think on most assignments I would be inclined to offer just 2 or 3 rather than 8. But the really key piece about making the choice of options fair across all the options is that there is a common rubric of expectations that students are required to meet. So whether you choose to write an essay or create a brochure or a poster board, you are going to be responsible for discussing these concepts with a certain degree of depth and completeness, using course terminology. And so the standards are the same. This is how we can justify that we're not watering down the curriculum, compromising academic standards by applying the same rigorous standards across different alternative options for expression. And here's an example. I mentioned already that our first year students culminate their first semester with an open house where they meet and greet faculty and students from across the campus and discuss a portfolio of metacognitive learning that they have accumulated during the semester. In our science classes, the capstone project is to create a poster, just the way we see when we go to a professional conference. So it encourages students to adopt the mode of the kind of the professional expectations and standards that scientists often fulfill. And so students choose a research topic and they follow the scientific research process. They create a poster and they actually present their posters again at an open house where we invite people from all over the campus to come and talk to them about their projects. It may be that if you are looking to test students' knowledge of terminology, concepts, say in a biology class, where you're really looking about relationships among terms, in this case related to genetics, that you can give students either paper and pencil using Post-it notes or little manipulative laminated cards, or using inspiration software where students have to organize these terms into a schema that represents the relationships. So this, an option like this using visuals reduces the language load, but still requires students to demonstrate understanding of the concepts, the terms, and the relationships. And you can even ask that students attach a note to each one of these terms with a brief description or definition. And in our earlier session module on writing, we talked about options for expression movement. These options can be used to help students either produce a finished piece of writing like an essay, but also you could ask students to demonstrate using kind of a choreography their understanding of concepts. And I will attach a picture of our students from a biology class showing that they understand geological and evolutionary errors by creating a to scale map in chalk on the sidewalk outside our science building. And we've also talked extensively about using manipulatives. So these are just a reminder that although using manipulatives can, one, be a basis for organizing your ideas for completing a finished piece, in some cases they may actually serve to stand in for the actual assessment if what you are testing is content knowledge and the ability to express that orally as opposed to requiring students to create it in a traditional paper and pencil format.